Hey, everybody, welcome back to Mama Knows Best, and we're going to continue on with my Stroke of Insight, Chapter 6. Chapter 6 My Return to the Still. As I sat there in the silence of my mind, satisfied that Steve would get me help, I felt relieved that I had successfully orchestrated my rescue. My paralyzed arm was partially recovered, and although it hurt, I felt hopeful that it would recover completely. Yet, even in this discombobulated state, I felt a nagging obligation to contact my doctor. It was obviously that I would need emergency treatment that would probably be very expensive. And what a sad commentary that even in this disjointed mentality, I knew enough to be worried that my HMO might not cover my costs in the event that I went to the wrong health center for my care. Still sitting at my desk and my good left arm, with my good left arm, I reached for the 3-inch stack of business cards I had collected over the past few years. I had only visited my current doctor once, about 6 months earlier, but I remembered that there was something Irish about her name. Saint something. So I began searching for associations. In my mind's eye, I could recall perfectly the symbol of the Harvard crest located at the top central position of her business card. Pleased with my ability to remember exactly what the card looked like, I thought to myself, fine, this will be just fine. All I have to do is find the card and make the call. To my astonishment, however, as I looked at the top card, I realized that although I retained a clear image in my mind of what I was looking for, I could not discriminate any of the information on the card in front of me. My brain could no longer distinguish writing as writing or symbols as symbols, or even background as background. Instead, the card looked like an abstract tapestry of pixels. The entire picture was a uniform blend of all its constituent pieces. The dots that formed the symbols of language blended in smoothly with the dots of the background. The distinctions of color and edge no longer registered to my brain. Dismayed, I realized that my ability to interact with the external world had deteriorated far more than I could ever have imagined. My grip on normal reality had been all but peeled away. I was no longer capable of perceiving the mental clues I had depended on to visually discriminate between objects. On top of my inability to identify my own physical boundaries, and in the absence of my internal clock, I perceived myself as fluid. Coupled with my loss of long term and short term memories, I no longer felt grounded or safe in the external world. What a daunting task it was to simply sit there in the center of my silent mind, holding that stack of cards and trying to remember, who am I? What am I doing? Searching for any connection with my external reality, I had lost all sense of urgency. Yet, amazingly, my frontal lobe fought hard to hang on to the task, and I still embraced the occasional wave of clarity that routed me back onto this earthly realm via my physical pain. I could remember what I was doing, and I could discriminate again between the varied incoming stimulation. So, faithfully, I plodded forward. That's not the card. That's not the card. That's not the card. It took me more than 35 minutes for me to navigate my way a mere inch down into that stack where I finally recognized the Harvard crest. By this point, however, the entire concept of a telephone was a very interesting and bizarre kind of thing. I felt oddly removed from my ability to have any comprehension about what it was I was supposed to do with it. Somehow, I understood that this thing in my space was going to connect me through a wire to a completely different space. And at the other end of the wire, there would be a person to whom I could speak and she would understand me. Wow, imagine that. Because I was afraid that I would lose my focus and the doctor's card would get confused with the others, I cleared the desk space in front of me and placed her card directly in front. I picked up the phone and placed the number keypad on the desk right next to the business card. Because my brain had been on a steady rate of disintegration, the appearance of the number pad now looked completely strange and foreign. As I sat there drifting in and out of my insubordinate left mind, I remained calm. Periodically, I was able to match the number squiggle on the card to the number squiggle on the telephone keypad. To keep track of the numbers that I had already dialed, I covered the number on the business card with my left index finger as soon as I pushed the number on the phone using my stumpy right index finger. I had to do this because I could not remember from moment to moment which numbers I had already pressed. I repeated this strategy until all the numbers were dialed, and then I placed the phone to my ear and listened. Feeling drained and disoriented, I was afraid that I would forget what I was doing. So I continued to repeat in my mind, this is Jill Taylor. I'm having a stroke. This is Jill Taylor. I'm having a stroke. But when the phone was answered and I tried to speak, I was blown away to discover that although I could hear myself speaking clearly within my mind, no sound came out of my throat, not even the grunts that I was able to produce earlier. I was flabbergasted. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. I can't talk. And wasn't until this moment when I tried to speak out loud that I had any idea that I couldn't. My vocal cords were inoperative and nothing, no sound at all would come forth. Like priming a pump, I pushed air forcefully out of my chest and inhaled deeply over and over again, trying to make some sound. Can you imagine? She would like sound like somebody heavy breathing on the phone, but not saying anything. Trying to make some sound, trying to make any sound come out. Realizing what I was doing, I thought, they're going to think this is an obscene phone call. Don't hang up. Please don't hang up. But just like priming a pump, repeatedly pushing the air in and out, forcing my chest and my throat to vibrate. Uh, uh, this finally came out. The call was immediately forwarded from the receptionist to my doctor, who miraculously just happened to be sitting in for office hours. With the patience of a gentle soul, she sat and she listened as I struggled to enunciate, "This is Jill Taylor. I'm having a stroke." Eventually, my doctor understood enough of my message to comprehend who I was and what I needed. She directed me, "Get to Mount Auburn Hospital." As she spoke, although I could hear her words, I could not grasp their meaning. Feeling despondent, I thought to myself, if only she would speak more slowly and enunciate more clearly. Perhaps I could get it. Perhaps I could understand. And with hope in my heart, I pleaded in a semi intelligible way. Again, with concern, she slowly repeated her directive: "Go to Mount Auburn Hospital." Yet again, I could not comprehend. With patience and genuine compassion for my obvious neurological breakdown, she repeated her directive. Repeatedly, I could not connect meaning to the sounds and make sense of what she said. Feeling exasperated by my own inability to understand her simple language, I primed my vocal pump again and somehow communicated that help was on the way and we would call her back. At this point, it didn't take a brain scientist to understand what was going on in my brain. The longer the blood from the hemorrhage continued to spill into my cortex, the more massive the tissue damage would become, and the more cognitively inept I would be. Although the AVM originally burst near the middle to the posterior portion of my cerebral cortex in my left hemisphere, by this point the cells in my left frontal lobe responsible for my ability to generate language were also compromised. It was predictable that as the blood interrupted the flow of information transmission between my two language centers, Broca's anteriorly and Wernicke's posteriorly, page 40, which we already know, all right, I could neither create, express language, nor understand it. At this point in time, however, my greatest concern was that my vocal cords were not responding to my mental cues. I still feared that the centers in the pons of my brain stem, including my center for inspiration, were possibly at risk. And I believe she means breathing, inspiration, breathing in. Feeling defeated and tired, I hung up the phone. Rising from my seat, I wrapped a scarf around my head to block the streaming light from my eyes. Picturing the deadbolt on my front door, I slowly navigated my body, step by step, down the front flight of stairs by sliding on my butt. Ready for company and no longer preoccupied with what I felt compelled to do, I crawled back up the stairs to my living room, where I crouched on my couch to quiet my weary mind. Despondent and alone, I felt discomfort in my pulsating head, and I communed with my wound as I acknowledged the degeneration of my connection to this life. With every moment that passed, I felt my connection with my body becoming weaker and weaker. I sensed that my energy was leaking out of this fragile container, deadening the distal tips of my fingers and toes. Distal means far from the body, right? Obviously, if she's saying fingers and toes. Um, I could hear the machinery of my body grinding its wheels as my cells systematically manufactured my life. And I feared that my cognitive mind was becoming so disabled, so detached from its normal ability to function, that I would be rendered permanently disabled. For the first time in my life, I understood that I was not invincible. Unlike a computer that could be turned off and then rebooted, the richness of my life was completely dependent on not only the health of my cellular structure, but on the integrity of my brain's ability to electrically transmit and communicate its directives. Humbled by the direness of my situation, I grieved for the loss of my life as I anticipated the death and degeneration of my cellular matrix. Despite the overwhelming presence of the engulfing bliss of my right mind, I fought desperately to hold on to whatever conscious connections I still retained in my left mind. By now, I understood clearly that I was no longer a normal human being. My consciousness no longer retained the discriminatory functions of my dominant analytical left brain. Without those inhibiting thoughts, I had stepped beyond my perception of myself as an individual without my left brain available to help me identify myself as a complex organism made up of multiple interdependent systems, or to define me as a distinct collection of fragmented functions. My consciousness ventured unfettered into the peaceful bliss of my divine right mind. I'm going to stop just for a moment because I want you to understand that I'm thinking about all the things of the differentiations in chapter 3 of the left brain to the right brain. And in my brain, I'm like developing a painting as I'm reading. So that's like my brain loves to multitask, but it makes me not as good as reading. So I'm verbally saying it so that maybe my brain will let it go and I can read without interruption. Okay, now we're going back. As I sat in the silence and pondered my new perceptions, I wondered how disabled I could become before the loss would be permanent. I contemplated how many circuits I could lose and how detached from my higher cognitive abilities I could tread and still have any hope of ever regaining normal function. I hadn't come this far just to die or become mentally vegetative. So I held my head in my hands and wept. Amidst my tears, I clenched my fists and prayed. I prayed for peace in my heart. I prayed for peace in my mind, and I prayed, please, Great Spirit, don't shut down my life. And into the silence, my mind implored, hold on, be still, be quiet, hold on. I sat there in the middle of my living room for what seemed to be an eternity. When Steve appeared in the doorway, no words were exchanged. I handed him my doctor's card, and he immediately called for instructions. Promptly, he escorted me down the stairs and out the door. Gently, he guided me to his car, strapped me in, and reclined the seat. He wrapped my head without a scarf to shade, or with a scarf to shade my eyes from the light. He spoke softly, encouragingly patted my knee, and proceeded to drive to Mount Auburn Hospital. By the time we arrived, I was still conscious, but obviously delirious. They placed me in a wheelchair and led us into the waiting room. Steve was clearly distressed with their indifference to the severity of my condition, but he obediently filled out my paperwork and helped me sign my name. Waiting for our turn, I felt the energy in my body shift, and like a balloon, I deflated into my own lap. Shifting into a semi conscious condition, Steve insisted that I receive immediate attention. I was taken to have a CT scan of my brain. They lifted me out of the wheelchair and placed me on the CT gurney. Despite the throbbing pain in my brain that was echoed by the thumping sounds of the machine's motor, I was conscious enough to find some satisfaction in learning that my self diagnosis had been correct. I was experiencing a rare form of stroke. I had a massive hemorrhage flooding the left hemisphere of my brain. Although I don't recall it, my medical records indicate that I was given an initial dose of steroids to slow the inflammation. The agenda was to ship me immediately to Massachusetts General Hospital. My gurney was lifted and bolted into position in an ambulance for the ride across Boston. I remember that a kind hearted paramedic accompanied me along my journey. With compassion, he wrapped me in a blanket and arranged a jacket over my face to protect my eyes. His touch upon my back was comforting, his gentle kindness priceless. I was finally free from worry. I curled up into a fetal ball and lay waiting. I understood that on this morning, I had witnessed the step by step deterioration of my intricate neurological circuitry. I had always celebrated my life as a magnificent physical manifestation of my DNA, and oh, what a colorful genetic pool from which I had been spawned. From 37 years, I had been blessed with an agile mosaic of electrified biochemistry, and like many folks, I had fantasized that I wanted to be awake when I die, because I wanted to witness that remarkable final transition. Just before noon on December 10th, 1996, the electrical vitality of my molecular mass grew dim, and when I felt my energy lift, my cognitive mind surrendered its connection to and command over my body's physical mechanics. Sanctioned deep within a sacred cocoon with a silent mind and a tranquil heart, I felt the enormousness of my energy lift. My body fell limp, and my consciousness rose to a slower vibration. I clearly understood that I was no longer the choreographer of this life. In the absence of sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, and fear, I felt my spirit surrender its attachment to this body, and I was released from the pain. So it sounds like she died, is what's going on. Okay. And I want you to understand like the power of not only her mind, but everything that she was up until this point. Because if she weren't interested in all of this stuff, she would have thought right away, like something is wrong, I'm dying. And if she didn't stay consciously aware of what was going on, then she could have decided to die right then. And that is what often happens is that when people decide to go, they decide to go. Okay. It's like they know it's done. But because she knew that this was her purpose, right? She had spent her whole life and it was based on her brother's schizophrenia that drew her into the field that gave her the knowledge to not panic, right? That's, um, as a mother, I was a medic first. Well, yeah, I was a medic a couple months before I became a mother for the first time. And I had also gone to school for teaching. And that was relevant because I learned to not panic because when my first son was born, it was like very, he was okay for like 2 days, but then he started to die. And so I kind of understood with all the experience that I had already had and like my own faith that I didn't have to panic. Okay. And so that's kind of the thing is like when you teach yourself how to release control because you're not in control of any of this stuff, you can appreciate it and you can get through more. But if you let yourself overtake and like you can take the control element of it and put it within yourself and you can decide, hey, this is my end times, and then you can go with it, right? And I've heard before that we have like 6 points of exit throughout our lifetime that you can choose to go earlier if you want to. Okay, so I don't personally know that to be true, but I can go back and look at times when I like survived like the only thing that I can think of is an IED. When I was deployed, I survived an IED, and I believe that I survived it because I felt like something was going on. Like I just sensed that something was going on. And so I just kind of started to pray and close my eyes and imagine a white bubble of light around my truck. And as my eyes were still closed, I saw a flash and then I heard a bang. And it was because an IED had gone off like just as our truck passed over it. But it was right in between our two trucks and it angled straight, almost straight up. So it didn't do any damage to us. Okay. So it's like that could have been one of my exit points that if I didn't have anything to live for, or I didn't think that I was going to live beyond my deployment, that I could have gone. I could have chosen to exit at that point. Okay. So are these things true? I don't know, but I'm still here. Okay. All right. I love you. We'll continue on with chapter 7. All right. Bye for now.